Let me welcome you to Chat with Matt. I'm Matt Budd. I've been chairing the Financial Executives Networking Group since 1996, a little hobby of mine, a wonderful hobby. I came up with Chat with Matt during the pandemic, actually at the very beginning of the pandemic, as a way to provide all of you with interesting people who have something important to say about managing your career or your job search process. I try to cater to our alumni members and our active members in terms of making them more successful. The FENG started as a job search related group, posting job leads and so forth. And now we're since so many of my little joke is we're set up like the mafia. You can join, but you can't quit. We have members who have been with us their entire careers. Some of them joined us in the late 90s and still actively read the newsletter and contribute to our success. So with that as a background, I'm going to have Tim join us. Tim Jackson, Ph.D. you should know, who is an expert on leadership development. And he's going to be talking to us about the leadership development process, everything you should know, and maybe even some things you wish you didn't know. But in any case, we're going to get started here, and I'm going to have Tim introduce himself. So Tim, if you can, I'm going to add a spotlight here. Pleased to introduce you to Tim Jackson. Tim and I have become besties. We've now had, about 2 hours of conversations, Tim?
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
Tim and I share something in common. We both worked with our fathers at one point. So we'll share the scars someday, okay?
Well, Matt, you also share a common trait with my father because my dad worked into his early 80s, and now you're still going strong. What in your early 70s? So
yeah,
you share that longevity.
Yeah, I should share a quick funny story. My wife and I were, as I told you, at the theater last night, and they were doing a survey. And we've now gotten so old that the last box on the form was 75 plus. And that's when we had to sign. I don't get it. Really, I still feel very young. So what do I know? Tim, why don't you, one of our traditions is that I ask speakers to do their own introductions. As you can imagine, I've been introduced many, many times, and they always muff it. So when I introduce people, I just say, this is Tim Jackson. He's going to be speaking to us about leadership development programs. And Tim, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what we should know about you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you, Matt, and everybody. And some of you reached out to me already on LinkedIn. Like I see Indran, you sent me a message. Hi, Indran. So I really appreciate the chance to be here with you and all your membership. This is amazing opportunity to share some of my knowledge, hopefully in a way that's useful and provide some food for thought for all your members. So so my background is I'm a leadership development consultant. I run my own consulting firm based out of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I've been in leadership development for almost 20 years total, but I've been consulting for about 17 years. And primarily what I focus on in my work is the development side of leadership. So some consultants can work in selection and helping to assess and select the best leaders for certain positions. Over the years, I've kind of gravitated more towards the development side. And what that tends to mean for me is a focus on in-depth assessment, development planning, which is really just another word for goal setting, and executive coaching. I've worked with all different kinds of companies across industries, from utility to chemicals to CPG, charitable organizations, and on and on. I've worked across levels, so anywhere from individual contributors all the way up to CEOs. I've worked with clients across different geographies. So I've worked with clients mostly in Canada and the US, but also in Western Europe and in China. And I have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology. So I did my and I actually did my research on leadership issues. So I did
Oh,
research on leadership. I was really curious. That was the reason I went in to do the postgraduate degree, because I wanted to study leadership in particular. So I kind of got through the coursework, and then the fun part was when I got to do the the deeper investigations on some leadership questions. I've tried to publish some of my ideas over the years in a few different outlets. So there's a national newspaper here in Toronto, in Canada, called the Globe and Mail. It's kind of like USA Today of Canada, maybe a little bit better writing.
huh?
Also, like Forbes.com, some trade journals in HR, um, and I've also published some research in peer-reviewed publications. And by the way, I've also started a website where I'm publishing articles, which is where I sent you these articles that you shared with
Yeah.
your membership from. So that's actually an email newsletter blog type website. So one thing I'll mention, hopefully remember at the end of the session, is just to let people know that if they want to sign up for the email newsletter that I'm circulating about, where I'm writing original articles on leadership issues, I'm happy to include them, or they can email me, or they can go to the website and sign up. So yeah, and so in
Yeah,
terms of how I
I
got
should
into
also
this,
mention, I think
yeah,
everybody knows that Tim has also been contributing. He's contributed 3 articles so far for our newsletter. I, I noticed wasn't bragging about that he's been published to the FENG, but we'll let it go this time.
my
I
bad,
expect that to be part
my
of
bad.
your introduction to other groups. That knowing
I
not,
think that
I'm
has to be
published
part of the deal
for the
going forward.
FENG.
Yeah,
So
I think that has to be part of the deal, and I think that's fair. Yeah,
yeah,
fair
we need
enough.
some publicity here.
And Matt, I think you and I were talking off camera before. You thought it might be a good idea for me to just mention how I kind of got into this line of work.
Yes, how'd you get into this mess? My own story is everyone else took one step back. That's how I got this job.
You were the only one standing forward. Yeah.
Yep. Everyone else like disappeared. We need a volunteer. Oh, whoosh.
And that was
But
1996, and
I've
here you
never
are.
been known for being smart. So what can I say? 25 years later, still doing this.
Still doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, tell us how you got into this. What your father was in this business, wasn't he?
Yeah. So you mentioned that at the outset. It's I don't know, maybe a bit of a quaint kind of interesting story. But so my dad was he also was a consultant in the leadership development space. He got his Ph.D. from the University of Chicago. Even though he's Canadian, he went down to Chicago to get his Ph.D. In the 60s, and he came back to Toronto and tried to teach for a few years, but didn't really like that. So he started his own consulting business, and so basically from the late 60s on, he was running consulting business, and he kind of cycled through various partnerships over the years. He would have a partnership that would grow, and then the partners would go their separate ways. Then he would build a new one, and et cetera, et cetera. So he was
Yeah.
a very charismatic, inspirational, super positive kind of guy, kind of the kind of person that, walks into the room and it feels like a spotlight is on him, and everybody, he's very friendly and everybody likes him.
Hmm.
And for some reason, when I was a kid, I always thought, I'm going to be different than my dad. I'm going to strike out on my own. I'm going to differentiate myself, be my own person. And I remember going to university and not wanting to study psychology because that's kind of what my dad did. But after a few years, I did take some psychology courses. I really liked it, and just found that was a good home for me. And then, another interesting thing about my dad was he would come home after a long day when I was a kid, and we'd sit around the dinner table, and he would talk about executives he was working with. He would talk about leadership issues. He would talk about leadership challenges people were facing, some of his clients, and I just found
Yeah.
that really interesting.
Yes,
So
well, that's
eventually,
how most if you see families are families of doctors, there's families of lawyers, and it's for exactly the reason you just mentioned that's the dinner time conversation.
well, I guess it's a good argument for getting together for dinner every night, right, as a family,
It is
and sharing some of
definitely.
that knowledge. So anyway, so eventually I worked for him a little bit in the summertime as an intern, and just eventually decided once I finished my undergraduate degree, decided to do my PhD. And then kind of a funny story. So I was finishing my PhD. My dad was in his early 80s. He had tried to sell his practice a couple of times to buyers. He didn't get any interest, and part of the reason was he ran into the 2008 financial crisis. And
Oh,
then he calls me up one day. He says, "Well, Tim, if you want to finish up your degree, there might be an opportunity for us to work together." So I said, "Okay." Well, so I accelerated my progress. I finished my PhD a year early, and I came out to school and started working with him. and he kind of taught me the ropes for a couple of years really.
Mhm.
And then we transacted the business. It changed hands, and at the age of 83 or 84, he became my employee. So he was, and he was
Great.
great about it. He was just a great guy. He was a great team player. He wanted nothing more than to help me succeed. Um, and I would get calls. I would get calls months and years later from people, and saying they wanted to work with me or do a project together. And I kind of had a funny feeling with some of those calls. He was kind of pulling the strings, or he had reached out to people he knew and said, hey, could you, if you have any need for leadership development, could you give Tim a call? So I got a call once that I was driving in an Uber in a highway in Toronto out to see a client, and guy said, I said, hello. And he said, I worked with your dad 25 years ago and he assessed me, and my wife was cleaning out the garage and she found the assessment report, and I reread it and it's still really valuable. And now my sons are about to take over my business. Would you come and assess them? This is a guy who was running a business in Michigan. And, so got calls like that. And so I definitely got my start from my dad. As much as I tried to go my own direction, I got pulled into the vortex of leadership development, or or at least developed my own interest in it. It's been a lot of
I think
fun.
that's a great story, Tim.
Yeah, it's
To have a positive relationship with your father where he was coaching you and then he became your employee. I love that story.
yeah, we had some interesting adventures. And he passed away about a year ago now, um, unfortunately. But I still draw a lot of wisdom from him, and
He's
still work
sitting
with
on
some
your
of the same
shoulder, Tim.
client organizations that he first started working with. So I've enjoyed those long-term
Maybe you didn't
relationships.
hear what I said was he's sitting on your shoulder,
Yeah, he's always
which is a good thing.
his voice is in my head for sure, at various
Absolutely.
moments. Yeah,
No, that's a great story.
yeah.
So why don't we start with, why don't we jump right in here and talk about the different types of development programs offered by organizations?
Yeah, so I'm going to break these down into some different categories for people, and hopefully
Please.
they make sense. They're distinct. But first thing I want to mention is just that when I think of leadership development, I kind of default to the type of program that I typically deliver most often, and that's the type of programs that I think were mentioned in those articles that you published. So it's basically 3 steps in those programs. There's an in-depth assessment step, step 1. There's a developmental planning or goal setting step, that's step 2, and then there's an executive coaching engagement, that's step 3,
Yeah,
and that's a kind of the process model. So I just wanted to be clear that that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of my most dominant experience set.
right.
But as I'll lay out here in answering the question, there's lots of different types of leadership development. So the first
Right. So
one,
we're not going to be talking about the ones where they put 100 people in the room and try to do something.
well, I can just share those as a compare and contrast with
Okay.
what I typically do. So again, so what I typically do is this 3-step model: assessment, development planning / goal setting, and then executive coaching. This is you can kind of think of these programs as like an accordion. They can expand or they can contract depending on the needs of the organization. So for more junior people, you get really kind of squished, like a squished in accordion,
Yeah.
with very brief, kind of engagement. And maybe there's just like a very cost-effective assessment. There's maybe just like one goal-setting discussion, and then there's 1 or 2 coaching sessions. But for an executive, that accordion expands, and the process could be much longer. So you have more meetings. You might have 6 to 8 to 10 coaching sessions at the end. You might have more touch points with the leader supervisor, like 3-way meetings with the client or the leader, the supervisor, and yourself as a consultant. So they can kind of expand and contract depending on the needs of the leader. So that's the first one. I call that kind of an individualized leadership development model. Second approach is probably one that most of your membership are familiar with, which is really just like workshops. So you go to a workshop, you sit in a classroom. It's kind of a formal, traditional way of learning, and you talk about leadership issues, or you talk about foundational concepts and how to manage people. Usually, this is more of an early career kind of
Yeah.
tool. Not so much for like senior leaders or executives. The next type of program I would say is kind of a hybrid. So this would be programs similar to what a lot of executive MBA programs offer. executive education programs offer at major educational institutions. So you get some workshops or you get some classroom kind of exposure to certain kinds of content. You might have some facilitated sessions that are sort of, or you might have a combination of classroom learning that incorporates a lot of facilitation techniques. And then you might
So
also,
this is where they use those assessment tests,
well, and some of those business schools, yeah, they do use assessments. So
Myers-Briggs, and
yep, you'll take like a personality, yeah, you'll take a personality type inventory. You might even do a 360. You might get a few coaching sessions. Like I just talked to a client the other day. She's doing a executive MBA here in Canada. She's got like, and she's got like 2 executive coaching sessions. They've got a team coach. She has a lifestyles coach, like life issues coach. So there's all kinds of like coaching that can get wrapped around these sorts of models. And yeah, so that's kind of hybrid. So we got individualized, we got workshops, we got hybrid. Another type is what I would call like a specialized type of leadership development program. So this could be specialized in a couple of different ways. So the first type of specialized program would be based on topics. So women in leadership is a specific type of topic that often gets a leadership program created around it.
yeah,
Or maybe leadership as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion. That would be another example of a specialized topic. So, you might get together for some workshops. There might be a subject matter expert that's speaking. You might have some facilitated group discussions, things like that. Another type of specialized program is based on groups. So, I was talking with somebody at a pharma company the other day, and they said that for their R&D people, they do a specific type of like leadership development program, and then for their salespeople, they do a very specific type of leadership development.
sure.
So functionally distinct based on who's kind of involved. Okay, so again, recap: we've got individualized, we've got workshops, we've got hybrid, we've got specialized topics. The next one is called, I just call it networking groups. So I don't know if you've heard of like organizations like YPO, like Young Presidents Organizations,
Oh,
but
sure.
there's a certain kind of organization there that will sort of promote leadership development as number one, involving the creation of social capital. So you meet a bunch of other people, which in itself can be fun, but also you can learn things from them about leadership. You can find out what they're doing to lead their organizations, and sort of trade war stories, trade experiences, trade templates, and how you do things.
Yeah,
An organization like YPO would also offer content. So they have, for example, they've linked up in terms of partnerships with London Business School of Economics and other groups to bring content in. They bring in expert speakers. So it's this kind of it's kind of like your knowledge sharing, your networking. There's a prestige component. There's also a kind of a confidentiality component with some of these groups, like especially for senior leaders. Some of the appeal, I think, of joining those networking groups is like, what we talk about in the room stays in the room, or we're going to go do an offsite with a group and we get some privacy and some confidentiality. So for senior leaders, that's a real attractive feature, because they can often feel very isolated, even in their own organizations, because everybody's politicking and putting, impression managing, and may not, be as open and transparent with them as they would like.
yeah.
So
Well, being a leader is isolating, isn't it?
yeah, it is, especially at the senior levels. It's a very lonely experience, and I think that last program type that I mentioned is something that definitely fills that gap and that need for connection. I think, to be frank, I think executive coaching is another reason that this is a very healthy, successful industry, is that it provides an outlet and a connection point for certain kinds of senior leaders that they need to partner with somebody in a very open, candid, private way, and it's not easy to find that necessarily, even within their own organizations.
Why don't you talk about the assessment process? Because I find that the most probably the most visceral reaction you might get from your client is during the assessment process.
Yeah.
It's the old "I'm perfect. How could I need any help?"
Yeah, it's a very it's really, I have a lot of admiration for people that subject themselves to leadership development programs that involve a very in-depth assessment process, because it's incredibly vulnerable, the position that these people put themselves in. So they have to be for example, in the case of the type of programs that I would run, like I do qualitative interviews. So I might interview anywhere from 10 to like even 20, upwards of 20 like stakeholders that work very closely with a given leader. And then I analyze all that data and I put, aggregate it, and I pull out the key themes around strengths and possible development needs. And then I even share some of the quotations, like basically from the interview transcripts with the leaders themselves. And that's a very humbling thing when you come face to face with that report that says all that stuff about you. These are the people that you as leader chose to comment on you, the people that you wanted feedback from, and some of it is better than you thought it would be, and it's more positive, but some of it is surprising, and some of it seems
Yep.
unfair. Some of it evokes a defensive reaction. So it's and there's a there's a bit of we can talk more about this if you want. There's a bit of an emotional roller coaster that takes place, and I find and I'll get back to just sort of dissecting the different types of assessments in a moment. But I find that when
Yep.
people get feedback, like there's initial emotional reaction to it, it's very strong. There's a lot of like, who said this? Who said that? I think this is the person who wrote this. It's kind of like trying to figure out where the feedback came from, attempts to justify the feedback. There's an over focus on negative criticism or perceived negative criticism. Sometimes I don't see the negative criticism as strong as the leader will see it.
Oh, okay.
But it's a really strong kind of initial emotional reaction. And then after a second or third reading, some of that begins to settle. And then I think with a bit of distance, with a second pass or third pass through the report, people can start to depersonalize it a bit. They can start to ask constructive questions about, okay, what's really important here?
Yeah.
They're less focused on feeling defensive or justifying themselves, which is very natural and normal, and just more
Yeah.
focused on like, what can I use from this feedback? And that's when we start getting into thinking about, okay, what goals are we going to set based on this information? But I have a lot of respect and admiration for the courage that it takes to subject yourself to that process, and I hope in the end people feel like it's a constructive, growth inducing kind of experience. But I can talk about the different assessment types. So you mentioned this is a topic that maybe some people are familiar with, I think. So there's the most common type of assessment tool is a 360 survey. So I think most of your listeners would probably be familiar with this kind of tool. So there's two main kinds of 360 tools. There's a questionnaire-based tool, which is
Mhm.
something that you would fill out online. You answer some questions and you click through, usually rate people on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 7. You might write, a few little short comments in a comment box. You rate people against a competency model that's embedded within the survey questionnaire. So this could be a competency model or a set of behaviors that the company that you're working with values, or it could be some competencies or behaviors that the survey company suggests are very useful.
Uh-huh.
And there's so an interesting sort of property about those kinds of tools is that you rate yourself as a leader, and then you get feedback from other people. So the assumptions are here that number one, you're going to get some feedback from other people, and based on the consensus opinions of other people, you're going to find out what they agree are both your strengths and also your possible weaknesses or development areas. And you're going to look at those other people's feedback to get a sense of what those might be. The second assumption underlying those questionnaire-based 360s is that there could be a difference between your self scores and other people's ratings of you, and that that difference is meaningful. So there's
Yeah.
sort of an underlying assumption that it's good to be an accurate estimator, right? It's good for your self ratings to kind of line up because that shows you're self-aware. But you could also be an underestimator, and if that's the case, maybe you lack a little bit of confidence to use a strength that you actually have, but maybe you don't believe that it's such a great strength, and maybe you don't pull it out in certain kinds of situations where it could be a real value to you.
Is Tell me if I can interrupt you.
Yeah.
Isn't that really the core of all the assessment tools? That the degree to which you know who you are as other people see you, the greater you can create that symmetry, the more effective you are. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what your primary modus operandi is, as long as you know that that's what it is, and other people understand it. You think that's
Yeah.
true?
Well, I think there's an underlying assumption that being self-aware as a leader contributes to effectiveness, because it
Ah,
allows you to appraise what's going on around you, to scan the environment and the landscape around you, especially in an interpersonal sense,
mhm.
and to make inform decisions based on that. And if you are not good at scanning that environment, it's hard to calibrate your behavior and your responses in certain situations to what's going on in the situation. Like the world of work is an incredibly complicated and ever-changing place
Yeah.
these days, right? Like norms of what's appropriate or not is changing. There's different generations involved. Sometimes some executives move around to different companies that have different cultures and different senses of what's right or wrong or appropriate, or they move countries. They work in different countries with different societal cultures. So it's a real moving target in terms of what's appropriate versus not appropriate. And I think to have a good kind of radar system about what's going on around you allows you as best as it can be expected to sort of calibrate your behavior to that. I think that's kind of what underlies the popularity of emotional intelligence in some respects. Like it's part of emotional intelligence as a skill set involves what's going on around you. And I've worked with people in the past that they have a bit of a blindness or a bit of a blind spot to sensing what's happening in the interpersonal world, and because of that, it's like they bump into a glass wall here and there where they experience some interpersonal friction with people, and they may not know why. And sometimes through the leadership development process, we can help them kind of figure out.
So once they get
why.
past the anger about what everybody said about them, people settle in pretty quickly, don't they?
They do, yeah, they do.
That's one of the amazing things. And I used to run strategic planning meetings, and the first meeting was always a fist fight. But after that, everybody kind of no, really. And after that, everybody kind of settled in.
Yeah, there's like there was a similar initial kind of roller coaster, initial emotional reaction, and then people settled in after that.
Yeah, once you learn you don't die from it, you can move on.
Yeah, no, and I think that's one of the most valuable skills that people can take from leadership development processes is just to learn to depersonalize feedback and just see it as data and not to take it on too much, like to listen to it and be receptive to it, but to just say to yourself, okay, what's the wheat and what's the chaff? What's the useful part? What's the not so useful part here? And for the stuff that's not useful, or that maybe I question the validity of it, let's just put that aside for a while, and I'll come back to it maybe later, or maybe if I do another 360 in the future, I'll see if that data point converges with anything. But for now, I've only got a certain amount of time, I've only got a certain amount of energy, and maybe there's other things that I need to focus on.
Yeah.
So just that
we don't want to run
process.
out of time. We should move on to writing goals. That's the part I would have the greatest trouble with. I never know what to write.
Well, it seems like you've made pretty good progress with this networking group, Matt.
Well,
So
I just
you must
fake
have
it.
had some goals. You what?
I just fake it.
Okay. Well,
I pretend I know what I'm talking about, and then everybody thinks I do. So far, it's working.
You've been faking it for a while, though.
Yeah, well, a quarter of a century, but who's counting? No, I'm serious. Writing goals would seem to be, well, for me, is problematic.
Yeah.
I don't do it well.
Can I ask you what you find challenging about it? I'm just curious.
Just coming up with the words. I don't know what I'm supposed to write down.
Yeah.
I told you we went to this theater thing and they were asking for suggestions. I can't think of anything.
Well, I think
just
that's actually pretty
experienced
normal.
in that situation, though. I just kind of, I'm in the moment. I think of things. I either enjoy a play or I don't enjoy a play. I don't want to tell them how to run their business.
Yeah. Well, I think that's actually a normal
let's talk about
experience.
the other executives and how you help them through coming up with some goals.
Yeah, so I would say that's a normal experience for people to have. Like I've worked with really senior people where I say, okay, we're going to write some goals. Like, what do you mean? Like, can you give me an example? I'm like, well,
There you go.
what do you mean?
That's
What do you mean? What do you mean example? Like it's a goal. Like you're a successful person. That and I know. Like, can you give me a few examples? So I think it's pretty normal for people just not to necessarily feel like they know how to do this automatically. But yeah, there's lots of different ways.
The primary thing with accountants is we fill out forms.
Okay.
So that's the problem. Right. If you gave me a form to fill out, I could probably do it.
Okay. That fits the skill set.
So that's the problem with coming up with goals.
Mm-hmm.
So, just talk through how you help people to come up with appropriate goals.
Well, actually, the goal setting process in my work starts pretty early. So even before the client or the leader gets any feedback, I ask them to draft a straw version of their development plan, independent of getting any feedback from the 360, independent of any outside data sources. Just like, what do you think you need to, or what you would like to work on? If you had to write your goal plan right now, like what would that look like? And so I get them to write some stuff down pretty early in the process, and that gets them thinking and kind of warmed up to the goal setting, the formal goal setting process, which will will take place later. And then if they find something, if they write a goal that they really like, they can just get started working on it. They don't have to wait till we, collect all the 360 data and process it and discuss it. So, so that's one thing, is start early. The next thing is, I say to people, just think about what resonates with you. Like, we've now, so let's say we've gone through the report, we've gone through all the data we collected, we've debriefed it. Maybe we had 3, 4, even 5 meetings, like debriefing all this information. You've had every single question that you could think of answered. And what's sticking with you? Like, what do you think about outside of the sessions, and what resonates with you? Or if you wake up in the middle of the night, like, what from this experience are you thinking about? And start with that, and then just write some general buckets down. And then usually we just talk it through. We kind of have a working discussion when we talk through, okay, so that's theme number 1. Tell me more about theme number 1. And we just flush it out, and we kind of iterate that through 2 or 3 different discussions. I tell people, think about what the feedback said, but also think about like what you want to work on. Like, it's great to listen to what what people in your organization want you to work on, but at the end of the day, this is going to be your plan, and we need this set of goals to be motivational for you. So in the end, you have to decide what you want to work on and where you want to grow. And you should be informed by all that feedback. You should be receptive to it and listen to it, but you have to choose yourself and sometimes, like most of the time, like 80 to 90% of the time, people choose themes that are aligned with the feedback. There's a small minority of times where they don't, and they have good reasons for that. And my role is just to respect their autonomy and respect their agency in those situations. Because I think the plan has to be motivational. Another thing I was thinking about before the session was, it's good to think about goals that might link to your values. So sometimes I'll get people to write down a draft set of goals, and then I'll say, okay, like, if you think about your most cherished values or core values, do any of them map onto this particular goal or these particular goals? And if people can find a connection point between the goals that they're drafting and the things that they care about the most, that can unlock a huge amount of energy. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. So I'll give you 2 examples, one from outside of work and one from world of work. So one example outside of work would be, let's imagine somebody had a goal to quit smoking. Maybe it's a guy my age, he's got kids. But he says, oh, I don't know if I want to quit smoking. Like, I go out and I socialize with all my buddies, and that's great social time. And I'm maybe having a drink with them and having a smoke with them, and I care about my friends, and that's an important value to me. So I don't know that I want to give up smoking, because then, I'm not going to see all those buddies as much. But maybe that person also realizes that they have a deeply held core value around being a great father. And being a great father to them means being around for their kids and being healthy and living a long life so they can see their kids grow up, and maybe even support their kids in caring for grandkids. And so if somebody like that can link up with a deeper held value, a reason why they should pursue a goal, then that can really unlock a lot of motivation and determination. Another example from the world of work is that I think about a lot, actually, is there's some research suggesting that women sometimes don't advocate as strongly for themselves when they're when they're in negotiations for promotion or for salary. And so some research study was done where they found that if they got women to think about or frame the negotiation as something that they were doing to support their family, a kind of like, they're winning some earnings that would in turn benefit the people that they love the most and care about the most. They found that women were able to access higher levels of assertiveness and were willing to push harder in those kinds of situations because they could link it up to this core value of family and loved ones and so forth. So so those are just some interesting points. I think maybe I'll just finish with this, is that goal setting, and sometimes people think it can just be like a little bit bland, but there's lots of different types of actions or types of goals that you can set for yourself. You can think about, what do I want to do? in terms of a behavior that I'm going to do. Maybe the behavior happens once, maybe it recurs over multiple occasions.
Mhm.
Maybe you want to
Yeah.
set a routine for yourself. Maybe you want to just think about doing a certain kind of behavior or expressing it only in specific situations or circumstances. So sometimes those goals are written like if then statements. So if this situation comes up, then I, will show this particular behavior. Sometimes goals can be behavioral experiments. Like I'm going to go out tomorrow and I have this meeting with the SVP, and I'm going to push the SVP on this one issue, and I'm just going to see what happens. I don't know what's going to happen, but this is something I want to work on. I want my voice to be heard. I want to be more assertive, whatever the theme might be. And I'm going to collect some data. I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk about it with Tim or with Matt, my coach, and we'll debrief what happened. Then we'll figure out what the next experiment's going to be. So those kinds of things can be goals too.
Why don't you turn to how you work with people? There's two things I would throw out to you and from my experience. Is number one, men don't like unsolicited advice. So and we're 90% male. So that's one thing that I deal with all the time. And the other thing I live by is you can't help people until they want help.
Yeah.
So why don't you talk to how you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, no, it is interesting. I think that coaching, people might think that it's about advice giving. They might see popular representations of coaches on TV, like athletic coaches, and who are very directive, right? Telling athletes to go here, do this, run this play, and they get an idea of what coaching is like, and maybe they think that transfers to an executive coaching environment. But in my experience, executive coaching is very different. So it's a very different power dynamic. The leader, the participant, has a lot more say and influence about what's discussed in the coaching sessions, what kinds of goals they set. They can even have influence over the structure of the program. They can negotiate that. And the coach actually spends most of their time listening, right? One of the key values I think of coaching is for a leader to be able to basically do what I call like verbal journaling. So where they articulate a number of their sort of non-linear thoughts to another person, and then they have that other person reflect them back or restate them back, and then they get to look at them from a bit of a distance and say, okay, I can kind of see the pattern that's emerging here. Like I can see when you play that back for me, Tim, I can kind of see there's like three key themes, and they can begin to organize their thinking into kind of a constellation of different ideas. And then once they have clarity, action becomes a lot easier. So then the coach doesn't have to give advice and say, do this, do that. The person can generate their own sense of what the pattern is, and therefore, and has a sense of clarity about it, and can therefore begin to build an action plan. So I try not to give advice as much as possible. And if I do, I always ask permission to offer my observations. And then I also always say, this is food for thought. Think about it. You can do it or not do it. And if you don't want to do it, I'm going to respect your decision to do whatever you want to do, even if it goes against what I think you should be doing. So I try to honor some of that autonomy. But yeah, I think the mental models sometimes people have of coaching are really informed by these popular notions, these colloquial notions. Like I had a client, well, Tim, I kind of see you like the personal trainer, and I don't want to come to the personal training session and like write the program. You write the program, right? And I think,
Right.
and we talked about it. I think that was a mental model that was kind of informed by sports or maybe other contexts, because in actual fact, the leader is kind of creating the program. They're creating the goals that they want to work on. They're suggesting what they want to talk about it. When they come to the session, start a session, you say. I often say, well, what do you want to talk about, Matt? Like, what's on your mind, and where do we go from here?
I think that's a big problem, Tim, is that people look to you for your expertise, right? I look to people who are who have an area of expertise to give me structure to the problem.
Yeah.
Because I see there's a problem there, and I think
Yeah.
that's where you come from. And this might be a good lead into the next question, which is how executives get selected.
Yeah.
But I have somebody working for me. I know they have a problem. I really don't know exactly what it is, and I need somebody to kind of tell me and create some structure around how we can fix it.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, this reminds me of another kind of phrase that I think is a touchstone for me, which is that leaders, coaches are the experts in the process, but leaders are experts in the content, right?
Yeah.
So I
Oh,
can
okay.
I can help
I like
give you a process for organizing your thoughts, and I can even give you some direct advice from time to time if I think it's appropriate, and if there's receptivity to it, if we have a good relationship established, and you'll trust what I'm saying. But the content of what we discuss is up to you, and so you bring the topics, you bring this is what I want to get better at, and then I try to
that.
facilitate a process where you can do
In
that. And I
our
think part
world,
of that, yeah,
yeah, in our world, the coaching comes from outplacement counselors,
yeah,
and I have to undo a lot of the stuff that they tell people is true. And I often ask people, this defies common sense. Why would you do it?
yeah,
The classic thing is leaving off your early work history. If you read the newspaper, everybody, John Smith, age 47, blah, 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 blah. Almost always their age is there. Why? Because it's an important data point. But, in some bizarre world, they advise people to leave off their age off of everything to appear younger. And it just doesn't work.
mm,
It's an important element for my decision making as an employer. And if you
mhm,
leave it off, it's a little bit disingenuous, and that's not a good thing for a CFO. So
mhm,
that's where I come from. But back to uh,
mm.
let's turn the discussion to how companies decide to have somebody get coaching.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, I think. So a few different categories here. So number one is a high potential. So high potential is somebody who's like early to mid career, maybe on the cusp of moving to the executive level. Um, they are great at what they do. The company wants to give them some special attention. They want to accelerate their learning growth. They want to expose them to some new ideas related to management and leadership that they haven't been exposed to in previous roles. So I say that's one category. Another category is senior leaders. Senior
Mhm.
leaders could be nominated just because the corporation, the company is just really into leadership development. They want everybody to just go through, and if you're a senior leader, you just do this. But more often, I find senior leaders get nominated for these programs when something new is happening in their role. So they take on a new job, they take on a new sort of scope of responsibility that could be very challenging. So something is kind of shifting, like moving from VP to SVP, and then let's like provide some coaching to support this person through maybe a stressful transition, or again, maybe taking on a new line of business. Let's give this person some support in managing that.
Because the
Another
worst
type,
thing we can do as a corporation is to let people fail. The sink or swim thing. Not a good
well,
idea.
I a lot of times corporations act in ways that are not necessarily benign, but I also see a lot of examples of corporations really trying to do the right thing in terms of supporting people and trying to help them succeed, even though they're asking very demanding things of them.
Yeah.
Another example of that actually is mergers and integrations. So
Yeah.
um,
Right. Right.
a few years ago, I had a big project where one massive company bought another part of bought a part of another massive company, and it was there was just a lot of stress and a lot of confusion. So they hired a lot of coaching professionals to provide support through the integration process. So coaching to support the integration. How do you lead through integration? Like when an integration happens, like all of a sudden the lines of authority become very blurry and ambiguous. Sometimes people don't know who's in charge and who's supposed to decide what. People are obviously uncertain about losing their jobs. So it can provide coaching in those cases as well. Another category would be sort of at-risk, potential derailer kinds of situations. So these are cases where usually somebody a little bit senior just runs into some issues in terms of their effectiveness. It could be interpersonal functioning, it could be rigidity, inflexibility, it could be they're abusive with people.
I would imagine it could be just understanding the generations in the workforce. No, that's a big
So,
topic now. Especially as you get older. I can tell you, most of the CFOs that I'm placing are in their 60s,
mhm.
and dealing with the people who grew up with everybody getting a trophy, right? and they had helicopter parents.
Yeah.
Or snowplow parents, as they're called. It can be challenging to understand how to motivate them.
Yes.
No one told me about work-life balance.
Yes.
No one mentioned it. I don't know. I don't really in my career.
And
Very
there's also a
strange,
lot of
right?
differences around, differences around how people use technology and prefer technology. And
Yeah.
I've read this just in the popular media. The younger staff are more prone to just want to stay home and like maybe be a little bit hybrid, but like stay, work from home even more so than come to the office, and more so than maybe older generations. And that creates tension because leaders want to provide some supervision, to people. I met with a guy for lunch the other day. He's like, sometimes I just want to walk to the other office and like give somebody more junior in my team like something to do and delegate something, but they're not there, and I can't. So I end up taking on more work because they're working from home, and that can create tension in and of itself.
Yeah. That's one of the big
So
challenges today. I went to a conference a couple of weeks ago about the hybrid model and
yeah,
how to make it work. I got a lot of my business done at the coffee machine or wandering over to the Xerox machine. Uh, and I don't know how you do a remote workforce. I would need coaching help on that, except I've been running a remote workforce for the last 20 some odd years. Our entire FENG staff is remote and has been since the early 2000s.
or you guys are front runners. You're leading edge.
Yes, absolutely. I just want to mention we're at 4:45. So anybody who has something for the chat box, questions for Tim, please put them there, and we're going to start answering questions. If you don't put anything in the chat box, Tim and I are going to just keep talking. So Tim, keep going.
God forbid.
You're doing great.
Well, I was just going to say,
I like the part about how you can help people re-energize their careers. People who are later. That's where I was going with this.
yeah, I can speak to that if you like.
Please.
Yeah, some of my thoughts on that are that, well, we've kind of covered this already, right, Matt? Like the workplace is changing, right?
Yeah.
Norms are changing, cultures, like people move around from jobs, and cultures from organization to organization could differ. Sometimes people take a job in a new country that has different societal norms. DE&I is having an influence on what the norms are in organizations. So I think one argument for engaging in leadership development at a later stage of career could be that it just helps you to keep up with all the changes in the landscape. And if you can map out the landscape around you, which is essentially what a 360 or in-depth assessment process would do, you get a better sense of like how to be successful, and that can make working more fun and enjoyable. Another thing I think is a reason why leadership development can continue to be valuable for later stage executives or later career stage executives is that just like learning is fun. It's fun to learn new things. I was listening to a podcast the other day which was talking about kind of the meaning of life, and they were interviewing a clinical psychologist, and one of the core purposes that he talks about with his clients is learning. Like he talks about quality of life, service, and learning. These are like the three kind of touchstones he hit on in terms of how to lead a very meaningful life. So learning is something that we can continue to do late in life. You're an example of that, right? You're going strong. My father was an example of that. And leadership development or leadership is a skill that is never, like, there's always something new to learn. Like it takes a lifetime to master it.
Maybe you can address a point that I was working in the publishing business back in the 1970s, and we had a coach who worked with us, and he said something that I appreciate you commenting on. He said, "You can't change people's attitudes, but you can change their behaviors. Their change in behaviors will ultimately affect their attitudes."
Yeah, that's a very common assumption of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is like a therapeutic modality or methodology that's used often in clinical psychology, which is the idea that sometimes like the behaviors can pull the attitudes and the thinking process along. So if you just basically like fake it until you make it, it's like act a certain way, or the other phrase, like act like the position that you want, right? Like if I want to be a VP and I'm a director, like just go around acting like a VP. So it's this idea of like, if you act a certain way, all of a sudden it'll, it may feel uncomfortable at first, but it'll pull your thinking process and your
Right.
attitudes and your motivation like along with you, and eventually you'll kind of like your thought process will catch up with your behaviors in a sense.
So we have a first question. Thank you. Thank you. How do you handle differences in feedback between, say, your supervisors versus direct reports? And how frequently do you recommend doing 360 reviews?
Okay, thanks, Indran. Nice to see you, and thanks again for reaching out on LinkedIn. That was great.
Apparently, we didn't put him to sleep.
In terms of the second question, how frequently, I don't think you want to do them more than once a year. I think every 2 years is a nice cadence. I think it gives you that kind of interval, gives you some opportunity to work on what you've learned. If you're switching roles as well, I would say just be careful, like or switching companies. Like you want to be in your role. I think at the minimum around eight months, so people have a chance to get to know you and understand you, what you're like, before you were to do a 360 with them. So keep that in mind too. So maybe every 2 years as a general rule, but then also special cases could be if you're switching roles. Make sure people have enough time to acclimatize to working with you.
Tim, the most important question here is, your supervisors and your direct reports say different things about you.
Yeah. So for that part, I mean, it really depends on the case. I would say the supervisors, like, all data is valuable. Supervisors, probably you would weight that data a little bit more heavily because they have a unique kind of influence on your career future, your salary. They probably have more influence in terms of like more senior level talent reviews that take place where you may be just discussed as a potential future leader, and they have to kind of advocate for you. So I would say you want to maybe pay a little bit more attention to the boss or supervisor feedback.
Especially since he signs your check.
Sometimes, yeah, whoever signs the check gets extra weighting in the 360 for sure.
Right.
I would
He who
say
has the gold makes the rules.
when there's a difference between between the supervisor and the direct report, so sometimes this represents like a skill pattern in the leader themselves, right? So if the supervisor ratings are low, but the direct report ratings are high, that leader typically is managing down very well, but not managing up or being maybe as savvy in terms of playing politics or managing their impressions, managing their brand. If it's the reverse, they're managing up too much. They may care more about how they're perceived by senior leaders, but they maybe don't spend as much time coaching, teaching, holding the hand of the people in their team. And so maybe there's an equilibrium point, or moderation point that could be found between those two.
Liz Wiener's put a very good question on the board. And I think it's appropriate. Assuming you get multiple assignments within a company, how do you approach sharing with your clients what you've achieved with other people in the company? I think in your article, you mentioned some confidentiality issues.
Yeah, this is kind of tricky. Thanks for the question, Liz. Basically, the short answer is I keep a pretty tight lip over who I work with. So let's take the example of within a company. Like I worked with a company here in Canada over the last 5 years, and I think I worked with like 27 different leaders, ranging from like plant managers to senior vice presidents. And I have a rule with all those people. I say, like, I don't talk about the fact that we're working together with anybody else in the company. Of course, I don't talk about the fact that anything we talk about, like in the coaching conversation, that's 100% private. But I don't share. I'm only going to send you the report, but I don't even share that we're working together with anybody else. So with that particular company, word kind of got around eventually, and it was slow, but that's eventually I got some I guess credibility based on that. Outside, sharing like successful cases outside of a client organization, I don't do it all that well, to be honest. Like, I've started writing these articles in my email newsletter, and in those cases I might add little vignettes about, well, I worked with a client at one point who, this was a little mini case study and this is what happened. But I don't, of course, use any names, and that's all anonymous.
But
so
people within the company don't necessarily know you're working there.
well, they would know that I'm working there. but they don't know who I'm working with, or I don't publish. Maybe they tell people who it's like, oh, I'm working with
Well,
Tim.
assuming they've shared with other people that you're working with them.
Well, then they can
And if
share
they
whatever
say something nice about you, Tim, I'm assuming they say something nice about you, which makes other people want to work with you at the
they can.
company.
Yeah, and they can do that. They can do that as much as they would like. Oh, sorry. The only
So
other
you
thing
kind of let
was
them take the lead.
I do, yeah, and I try to be very private and very confidential about the everything we talk about, the data that we collect, and also even the fact that we're working together.
Yeah, I think that's important.
And I don't get involved in any discussions about selection or promotion, or if they're going to think about firing somebody. I do not get involved in that stuff. I make that very clear from the beginning. The only other thing I'll add, Liz, is the public face of the leadership development engagement is the goal document that the leader creates. So everything inside the assessment, the conversations between the leader and I,
You know,
like that is held very, very airtight. But the public facing aspect of the engagement is the goal document, and that is meant to be shared with the boss. It's meant to be shared with stakeholders. It's meant to be sort of road showed around and shared with all the people that participated in the 360. And so the leader can say, hey, this, thank you for the input all of you gave me, and here's what I came up with. Here's the goals I want to work on, and I would really want to invite you to provide feedback for me if you see opportunities to do so in ways that are aligned with all these goals that I just wrote. So so that is the way that also that the effectiveness of the engagement is measured, is whether the individual achieves those goals. Okay, I think we're running
we have
out of time.
another
I don't want
question on emotional intelligence, EQ.
to. Yes, Shivraj, thank you for the question. How do you assess a leader's EQ in action? Are there specific EQ assessment tools that you utilize? EQ will come through in the work that I do. It will come through in the 360 interviews. So any kind of interpersonal skill or interpersonal effectiveness challenges will show up as kind of consensus themes within the 360 data. So they'll float to the surface that way. I use a couple different personality type inventories, and sometimes I can get a window into emotional intelligence or interpersonal functioning through those as well. I don't use a specific EQ tool. I know that one that's very popular with consultants these days is called the EQ, maybe EQI 2.0. And then one that's been used in the past is it's called the Mesquite, MSCEIT. That's another one. And there's another, I think it's it might be by Boyatsis. There's another personality inventory type tool. The Mesquite is like more of a performance test, kind of like an intelligence test, where you get a specific score on it. I think it's either Boyatsis or maybe the author is somebody else. It's a more of a personality type tool, and you answer a bunch of questions similar to a personality inventory, and you get some output based on that. The EQI 2.0, I haven't used that before. I just hear that people like it, and that's a preferred tool.
Good. We have 1 or 2 more minutes, and I don't see a last question, but perhaps there's something you want to say to wrap up. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, if you have other questions that I didn't get a chance to answer, you're welcome, Shivraj. If you have other questions that I didn't get a chance to answer, if there's something that wasn't clear about one of my answers, or if maybe I was in the process of fleshing out an idea and we didn't get the chance to kind of ride it out to the very end, just let me know. I'd love to chat with you or correspond over email to help you if this information can be helpful to you. So my email is tjackson@jacksonleadership.com. The only other thing I wanted to say was if you'd like to join my email newsletter and get some leadership articles, original written leadership articles, you can go to timjacksonphd.com. So that's timjacksonphd.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter there. And I would love to, if you do sign up and you have feedback, I would love to hear from you. I would love to engage in a conversation about what you're seeing in the field of leadership, and I would love to learn from you. So I'm trying to grow.
We're
and
also
develop.
hoping that Tim will write some more articles for our newsletter.
For
Hopefully,
sure.
we haven't scared him off.
For sure. No, it's I appreciate you
Tim's,
sharing
by
that.
the way, Tim's contact information is at the bottom of all of the articles that he writes for our newsletter. And his contact information is also in the meeting announcement that you've gotten. So please do write to him and sign up for his newsletter, visit his website. If he said anything interesting that, as Tim said, you want him to elaborate on, I'm sure he'd be happy to do that. And maybe he can even write a short article on his reaction to our conversation, things he might have forgotten to say, or another lengthy article. It's fine. Fortunately, email doesn't cost anything. So happy to promote them. And we hope that all of you have found this session interesting.
Yeah, thanks for having me,
Was there
Matt.
anything else you wanted to add?
No, I appreciate you having me. I appreciate people attending. I'm humbled that you all came, and I hope you got some useful, insightful, valuable information from this. And if I can elaborate on anything further, please let me know. I'd love to be of help and a resource to you.
In closing, I just want to thank all of you for joining me on Chat with Matt. I work very hard to find people who have something important to say relevant to your career. And Tim has certainly fulfilled that requirement today. So Tim, I want to thank you for being here today. And hopefully now that we're besties, we'll continue our conversations. And as I mentioned, I hope you'll write some more for my newsletter. I'm always starved for intellectual property, so please don't feel you're burdening me with your articles.
Okay. You asked for it, man. I'm going to be sending you stuff. So
good. See, no good deed goes unpunished, Tim. All right, so
Thank you.
one of my things is I like meetings to start and end on time, and people are starting to drift off. So again, Tim, thank you so much for spending this time with us, and I'll wish you well, and hopefully we've at the start of a beautiful friendship. Take care.
It's a pleasure.
Everybody, thank you, and we'll see you again on Chat with Matt.